Well, it's interesting about the signs because I remember one of the things about the occupation that you insisted on because everything was also, the original occupation was very greased.
Yeah.
It was all prearranged. We would climb over the ladders, sit down, have a couple of people speak while the press did that, and then Sheriff Larimore would come around, and we wouldn't even resist arrest this time. We would get up voluntarily and get on the buses and go in and be booked. But you insisted that the T-shirts that everybody wear that day were red and black because you were convinced that would make it look more militant than the actual because it was such a passive thing. You were convinced that it would look more militant, and I think you were right. Lots of red shirts is, that's a really good idea, I thought. I don't know.
I think even for us, it was like cognitive dissonance. It was making what you're seeing not really what it is, and that was the effect that I think we unfortunately had on law enforcement and everybody else.
Well, the first time went pretty well, yes?
Yeah.
And then we escalated things. We had an action 5 months later, and 100 people got arrested. Some people, I think, did go limp or not. I forget. Or not very many. I think
a few did, I think, yeah. But that's really, really rough ground out there. You don't want to do that unless you really thought about it.
And then on July 4th.
You could ask Jim where he has some scars.
And then July 4th happened of 1980.
Yeah.
And so we picked this date because, again, because of the framing. American flags, I don't know whether you saw it in the pictures, there were American flags all through that action, right? Because it wanted to be, you wanted to have the red T-shirts, but you also wanted to have the American flags. And so in 1980, we had our third occupation, and that time it was not greased. That time it was sneaking into the plant and showing up on site. And showing up and camping for days at a time and not letting them know where you were. This site is thousands of acres large. And it has a reservoir on it. So there were thoughts about taking canoes across.
Yeah. I mean, it was accessible then. It's not now, but for security
reasons. So they
reasons,
came and arrested us by helicopter. The nice Texas Rangers did. And that's when people decided to go limp out in the wilderness.
Yeah.
And by the way, 1980, the hottest record.
Summer on record. Yep.
So trying to recruit people down here to Texas, come to our national action. It's in July. By the way, we're having this 45-day record heat wave where it's 113 every day. It's like over 100. It was up until this last time, 2000, whatever we had, 2013, whatever. It was the summer that summer broke the record up. Yep. So when the Texas Rangers, who are not all that physically fit, show up in the helicopter to come arrest you on a 113-degree day, and you decide to go limp, they're not very happy about this decision. Not very happy about this decision. And so, but I wanted you to talk about why that decided. We escalated. We kept doing actions, but it was a dead end eventually. Because the press kept daring us to do we don't want to cover that thing again. You've already done that. Do something more spectacular. And we almost took them up on the dare every time. Can you talk about that chain, of that cycle you can get?
There was that cycle where it was a one-upmanship with the news media. But we also, I think, realized we had to step back for another reason. And I call it testosterone contamination, but...
Jim and I might take exception to
No.
that.
I want you to talk about this because it is we had a faction in that group that was very important to that.
It was it became more an issue of, for some of them participants, more an issue of challenging the law enforcement and the plant security than challenging the nuclear power plant. And that's really what made it more and more dangerous and less safe for us to be there.
And got more and more into kind of nonviolent or whatever, black ops.
Yeah, it
territory.
was. It was black ops. And none of the things were harmful, but there were smoke bombs on the top of buildings. It was only smoke. It was not an explosive. but it was really pretty spectacular and things like that. But it really was reaching the point where, because of the reaction of law enforcement particularly, it was really likely to get someone seriously hurt or killed.
So this is not a good example, but the last action that I can recall was the one where we went downtown to the Dallas Power and Light headquarters, which is now a condo building.
Yeah.
Had an action that was related to the economic troubles the plant was having. We decided to auction off the nuke to the highest bidder, and we did a very dangerous thing. We're looking back now, we closed off all the entrances and exits to that building by use of an abandoned car and by use of major electrical appliances. Get it? Nuke, electricity. And then we had somebody actually climb up on top of the facade of the building there.
There were two, I believe. Two.
Out,
yeah.
And conduct the auction from up there. Nobody could. They had to bring in a fire hook and ladder truck to come and get this guy off of the building, right? And so on. And it was exquisitely timed. I mean, we pulled up the car. It got placed right. We locked everything into position. It was great. But probably not what the fire code, allowed us to do. So it's just one of those things where it had no connection either to organizing. None of those actions had connections to organizing after a while, and that's the thing. They had no. They were tactics without a strategy.
But the one thing we did do was there was one door that was not obstructed. It was chained, but it was not obstructed. So in case there were an emergency inside, there was a door out. And it looked locked, but the hasp was not closed. And in case it got closed, I had the key in my shirt, and I was the person in front of that door. So it was, there was really a lot of attention given to safety, but it wasn't obvious that was happening.
I want to speak to a failed effort on our part, and there could easily be different interpretations on this, but there was another group that was involved in the interventions, and back in those days before they changed the rules, there was a two-phase licensing process. And this woman's name is Juanita Ellis, and she headed up CASE, and I forget what that was an acronym for.
Citizens Association. Yeah.
But she, early on in the 70s, when DPS was spying on people that were raising issues, questioning, there was a Continental Airlines pilot that had a very thick file created by DPS, illegal
Bob Pomeroy.
Illegal spying on citizen activism.
So this is a pilot and a housewife who, just by intervening in the licensing process for this nuke, attracted the intelligence division of DPS and were followed around for years. And if you met Juanita Ellis, she is the most milquetoasty person ever.
In appearance,
I cannot
facade.
imagine the boring surveillance job that was. But it's true.
She was an intervener, and when people say, well, were you successful? No, we were not successful in stopping the plant. Is it inherently unsafe? Yes. Do I think it's safer than it would have been had we not participated? Yes. So even though we drove the cost up from an estimated $1 billion too cheap to meter to $14 billion, I think, I think it's safer than it might have been otherwise. This plant's been operating since the early 90s, but the point of the story about Juanita, and the reason I bring it back as a learning experience, is it goes back to what I've been saying since November 9th. It's really about legal intervention. If you need to use a tactic, which includes a demonstration to call attention to the issue, I think the women's marches on the day after were great. But if that's the last thing you've done, you're just wasting your time. I mean, what the follow-up on that is absolutely critical. And I would say that about any other demonstration that you've been a part of. I know an activist that said, God, I've been to more demonstrations, this year than I've been in the previous 10 years. And my question is kind of, why? Okay, maybe that's a legitimate tactic, but what are you going to do on follow-up? I've had a little email exchange with somebody that is criticizing the Democratic Party for not doing X, Y, Z, and why isn't everybody full throttle a part of the resistance? And I'm thinking, I'm volunteering over 40 hours a week. I think I'm an active part of the resistance, whether it's as a volunteer with Downwinders at Risk over the weekend or with Clean Water Action this afternoon at their office, or this morning I was involved in electoral politics trying to elect some environmentalists to the Tarrant County Water District. There are a million things that you need to do. I'm pretty clear that one of the weaknesses in progressive movements are the unwillingness to raise money to do what needs to be done. And so that's kind of my focus now, helping raise money.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I came across a quote that we can leave with here, and it is that time. Let me read it to you and see if it rings true to anyone here in this room. It's slightly edited. Large portions embrace a kind of policy nihilism. They criticize any piece that doesn't completely accomplish their ideological goals, but don't build coalitions to devise solutions themselves. Sound familiar? The original quote was in relation to what's going on now in Congress. Large portions of the Republican caucus embrace a kind of policy nihilism. They criticize any piece of legislation that doesn't completely accomplish their conservative goals, but don't build coalitions to devise complex legislative solutions themselves. It's true. They want all or nothing. How many people do we know in the lefty community that want all or nothing, and yet are not out there building all or nothing coalitions with people that believe the same way, because there aren't that many of them. Right? This is what we do. We need to build smart coalitions and smart alliances and start where the world is, not where we want it to be.